Hey guys, welcome back from fall break. Our new adventures are going to be different lands and similar stories. We're going to be covering some folk tales and some fairy tales around the world. So let's think a few minutes. What do you like best about listening to stories? Okay. So, do you like telling stories also? Some people like telling stories. They're born storytellers. And if you think about it, we just heard lessons before fall break about Tomas and the library lady. He loved to tell stories, didn't he? He loved to tell stories to Papa Grande. Well, that's what these stories are. The stories that we are going to be looking at and listening to are stories that we've heard growing up. I know you've only been growing up for 6 years, but you know, my whole life I have heard these stories, okay? And that's longer than 6 years, maybe 7 or 8. Well, anyway, people all around the world love listening to and love telling stories. In fact, some of the stories told around the world are quite similar to each other. So today you're going to listen to some similar stories that originated many, many years ago in different places around the world. And although the variations come from different countries or lands, the characters or people and talking animals in these stories have similar adventures. So listen carefully to each of these stories to figure out how they're similar and how they're different from each other. All right? So let me bring up my screen. So I'm going to share it. All right, so as you can see, we are sharing Cinderella. Cinderella is where we're going today. So I'm going to go on through this right here for a second. We're going to talk some vocabulary words before we get started in our lesson today. Our first vocabulary word is character. The person or animals in a story. The characters in Cinderella are Cinderella, her stepsisters, her fairy godmother, and the prince. Characters. Embraced. That means held someone in your arms as a way of expressing love. Ashley and her mom always embraced when she arrived home from school. Embraced. Splendor. Great and impressive beauty. The mayor's house was the definition of splendor. It had the most exquisite hand-carved furniture and gorgeous paintings. Splendor. Warning. Statement telling someone about possible trouble. The weather person issued a tornado warning for our town, so we knew to prepare. Warning. Worthy, deserving respect, praise, or attention. Scott's good deeds made him worthy of becoming line leader. Worthy. All right, so where are we? Well, in this read aloud today, it originated in a country called France many years ago. And if you see, it is highlighted in red right here on our map. And it is part of Asia and Europe's continent there, okay? We live over here in North America, but over here in France. That's where our story takes place. Once there was a poor girl who was called Cinderella. Cinderella lived with her stepmother and 2 stepsisters. Now, Cinderella, her stepmother, and two stepsisters are some of the characters in this story. Her stepmother was mean to Cinderella and forced her to do the hardest and dirtiest work in the house. The poor girl had to scour the dishes, scrub the floors, and wash the clothes all by herself. When her work was finally done, Cinderella would sit, tired and alone, by the fireplace among the ashes and cinders. That's why they called her Cinderella. Cinderella's stepsisters lived in splendor. Remember, that means they had the best of everything. They had soft beds, thick carpets, and silver-edged mirrors. Poor Cinderella had to sleep on the floor next to the fire. One day, the king's son, the prince, announced that he was going to hold a royal ball at the royal palace. It would be a grand evening of dancing, and all the young ladies in the kingdom were invited. When they heard the announcement, Cinderella's stepsisters shrieked with excitement. For days, they primped in front of their mirrors and talked of nothing but the ball. They shouted orders at Cinderella and ran her ragged while they got ready for the ball. Now, Cinderella's stepsisters kept her so busy helping them that she had no time to rest. "Cinderella!" shouted the older sister. "Shine my shoes!" "Cinderella!" called the younger. "Iron out this wrinkle in my dress!" Cinderella helped her stepsisters get ready without complaining. Silently, however, she was longing to go to the ball. She imagined herself dancing in the arms of the prince. How wonderful it would be, and yet she knew her stepmother would never allow her to go. At last the time came, and the stepsisters and their mother left for the palace. Cinderella watched them drive away. When she lost sight of them, she began to cry. She felt so miserable and alone. Now, what characters have we met so far? We've met Cinderella and the two stepsisters, right? And we know she has a stepmom too, but we haven't seen her yet. What does Cinderella want to do? You're right, she wants to go to the ball like her other family members do. Why can't Cinderella do this? Because she's too busy helping her stepsisters get ready, isn't it? Good. But Cinderella was not alone after all. She, in a gentle voice, asked, "What's the matter, dear?" She looked up and saw a woman with a kind face. I wish I could," began Cinderella, but she could not finish for all the tears and the sobbing. "You wish you could go to the ball? Is that it?" said the kind woman. "Why, yes," said Cinderella with surprise. "Then it should be so, Cinderella. You are a kind girl, worthy of going to the ball," said the woman. Now, Cinderella deserves to go to the ball because she is kind and good. For you see, the woman was Cinderella's fairy godmother. "Now run into the garden," she said to Cinderella, "and bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella went to the garden puzzled. She picked up a pumpkin and set it on the ground before the kind woman. The fairy godmother tapped it with her magic wand and turned it into a dazzling coach lined with satin. "Now, dear," said the fairy godmother, "bring me the mousetrap from the house." Cinderella brought the trap, which had 6 live mice in it. The fairy godmother released the mice and waved her wand over them, turned them into a fine set of 6 gray horses. Then, with a touch of her wand, she turned a big rat into a fat, jolly coachman with long, fancy whiskers. "Well," said the fairy godmother with a smile, "what do you think? Are you pleased? Are you ready to go to the ball?" "Oh, yes," cried Cinderella. "But must I go in these dirty rags?" Her godmother laughed. Then, with a touch of her wand, she changed Cinderella's tattered clothes into a glittering gown of gold, and on her feet appeared a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the world. Cinderella stepped into the coach, but before she left, her fairy mother gave her a stern warning. Do not stay at the ball after midnight, not even a moment. When the clock strikes 12, the coach will once again be a pumpkin, the horses mice, the coachman a rat, and your gown the same clothes you had on. Now, a stern warning is a serious set of directions that you should follow. Okay? Cinderella promised she would leave before midnight. Then, calling out her thanks, she rode away in the coach, feeling happier than she had ever felt before. When Cinderella arrived at the ball, everyone admired her beauty. The prince asked Cinderella to dance with him. They danced together once, then twice, and again and again. Cinderella's face shone with happiness. Everyone at the ball looked on in admiration. Everyone, that is, but the two stepsisters. They glared jealously at the lovely lady, though they had no idea that they were glaring at Cinderella, because they didn't recognize her in her beautiful gown. For Cinderella, the music, the dancing, the warm gaze of the prince all seemed a wonderful dream. How quickly time slips away when the heart is happy. As Cinderella began to dance again with the prince, she heard the palace clock begin to toll. "Oh my," she gasped. "What time is it?" "Midnight," said the prince. "Oh, what was supposed to happen at midnight?" "Everything was going to change, right? The pumpkin, the mice, the rat, her clothes." "Yes, let's see if she makes it." Midnight, Cinderella's cheeks grew pale. She turned and as fast as a deer ran out of the ballroom. She sprinted down a long hallway and then down a staircase. At the foot of the stairs, she stumbled. One of her slippers fell off, but Cinderella could not stop. And as she ran breathlessly out of the castle into the darkness, she heard the clock strike midnight and felt her smooth gown turn into rough cloth of her everyday clothes. Her dazzling coach had turned back into a pumpkin, so she ran home alone. And when she got there, she realized that she was still wearing one glass slipper. When Cinderella had run away, the prince had raced after her. Although he did not catch her, he did find partway down the staircase a glass slipper that had fallen off her foot. And that is why the very next morning, the sound of trumpets woke the kingdom. The prince announced that he would marry the woman whose foot fit the glass slipper. He sent his men out on a mission. They were to try the slipper on the foot of every maiden in the land. So why did the prince want his men to find the woman whose foot fit the glass slipper? Oh, yeah, he wanted to marry her, didn't he? Yes. From house to house they went, trying the slipper on, foot after foot. On one foot the slipper was too long, on another it was too short, and so it went until they came to the house of Cinderella and her stepsisters. Well, Cinderella's stepsisters tried to fit their feet into the slipper. They squeezed and pinched and pushed, but that slipper would not fit. Then from the shadows, Cinderella stepped forth and said, "Let me see if it will fit me." "You?" the stepsisters cried. "That's ridiculous." "Every young woman in the kingdom is supposed to try on the slipper, and that includes me," stated Cinderella. The prince's men agreed, and as the prince had given strict instructions that every maiden in the kingdom was to try on the slipper, one of the men placed the slipper on Cinderella's foot, and it fit perfectly. The stepsisters' mouths dropped open in astonishment. They were even more shocked when from her pocket Cinderella drew forth the other glass slipper. Only then did the stepsisters understand the beautiful lady they had seen at the ball was Cinderella. They threw themselves at her feet and begged for forgiveness. Cinderella was so kind-hearted that she forgave them and embraced or hugged them. Cinderella married the prince. Her stepmother and stepsisters were invited to live in the palace with her, and she and the prince lived happily ever after. So I'm going to stop sharing here. All right, so let's talk some questions for a minute. Who was the main character in this story? You're right, it was Cinderella. Cinderella. How did she get her name, Cinderella? She would sit by the cinders and the ashes of a fire after a hard day's work, and that's how she got the name Cinderella. Good. How is Cinderella treated by her stepmother and stepsisters? Is she treated nicely? No, she's not. She's treated very unfairly. How would you feel if you were Cinderella and you got treated that way? I think I would be sad and kind of upset too. For what event does Cinderella help her stepsisters get ready for? Oh, the ball. Yes, the royal ball. So who appears to Cinderella to go to the ball? Her fairy godmother. Yes. And what does the fairy godmother do with the pumpkin and the mice and the rats? Oh, changes it into a carriage and the horses and the coachman. Yes. What warning does the fairy godmother give to Cinderella? The clock strikes midnight. She has to be home, doesn't she? Because what's going to happen? Everything changes back. Her clothes, the coach, the men, all of it goes back to being pumpkins and mice and rats. Yes. Who does Cinderella meet at the dance? Oh, she meets that handsome prince, doesn't she? And what happens at the stroke of midnight? She's dancing and she runs out down the hallway and down the steps. And what does she leave behind? She leaves a glass slipper behind and she starts running off. And it changes because she was still there dancing at the stroke of midnight. Good. So, what parts of this folktale could never really happen? Can a pumpkin be turned into a carriage or coach? No, it cannot. And can animals be turned into people? No, it cannot. All right. So I've got one more thing that we are going to do together up here on the board. So let me all right. So okay, this is story elements. All right, story elements. Let me get my lights to see if that might help just a minute. Oh, that looks a little better. Okay, so on their story elements, let's talk about the story elements of this story. Who were the characters in this story? You're right. Cinderella. Who else? Stepsisters. Who else? Stepmother. Good. Prince. You could put Prince up there. All right. And fairy godmother. Good job. And where did this story take place? Where did this story take place? Well, it was in their home. And then it also took place in the castle of the prince, right? Okay. So what is the plot of this story? So what happens in this story? Well, Cinderella has to do everything. Right? Her stepsisters want her to do everything. The stepmom wants her to do everything. Okay. One day, they get an invite, which is an invitation to a ball. They get an invite to a ball. She has to get her stepsisters together. And once she gets them together, they leave without her. Once they leave, her fairy godmother shows up. Her fairy godmother shows up and does what? Changes her into proper clothing for a ball. So she goes to the ball, Cinderella goes to the ball. She goes to the ball and meets the prince. The clock strikes midnight. And she has to leave. Once she gets home, she realizes she has one glass. The prince sends people around to find the lady he danced with. The prince sends people around to find the lady he danced with Prince and Cinderella get married. Now, I know that's not all of the story, but that gives you the gist of the story, all right? That gives you the gist of the story. So I hope that you enjoyed this story today. Hope you got a lot from it. Until next time, have a good one.